Hey everyone, this is Rob from Frontier Farmhouse, and today I'm going to be working on making some sauerkraut. It's probably the easiest fermented food to make. You can do it with some really simple tools, and it goes great on sausages, on pork chops, or just even by itself. It's a wonderful snack. So the only ingredients that you're going to need to make sauerkraut is going to be cabbage and salt. And then all you're going to need for the fermentation itself is either a mason jar or a crock like this one from eGen. And then for this mason jar, you also might want to get a fermentation kit. So this has an airlock lid, a pump to suck oxygen out of the jar, and then a weight to help keep the cabbage submerged under the brine. When it comes time to shred your cabbage, for equipment, all you're going to need is a knife, a cutting board, bowl for scraps, a container for your finished shredded cabbage, and then we've got a food shredder because we've got close to 50 pounds of cabbage, and this is just going to make life go a lot easier for us. First, I'm going to show you how to shred a cabbage by hand. Take your cabbage, peel off any of the outer layers. Some of these can be a little wilted, just look a little gross, and you probably wouldn't want to eat them or wouldn't want them in your sauerkraut. And then take it, cut it in half so that the root is at the bottom, and then cut it again into quarters so that you then have your stem here, or your core, and then just cut it at an angle. So you cut it out of your cabbage and then toss it into your bowl. We're then going to take these scraps, feed them to our animals, but you can toss them in a compost pile or put them in your food disposal, anything you really want. And then to shred the cabbage, you're just going to run your knife down the side and try and maintain a uniform thin slice. But if it gets a little thick, it gets a little thin, it's not the end of the world. It's going to be a rustic sauerkraut, so it's not a huge deal. And then just scoop all this up, put it into your container, and keep going. So, as you can see, we got a bunch of cabbage here prepped, and we're just gonna run it through the food processor. Just want to take a second to talk about the crock that I'm going to be using. This is a Korean style crock, which has been traditionally used for making kimchi, but is great for making any fermented vegetable, or even just as an airtight container. It's just this brown plastic tub. The thing that makes it really nice is it comes with this plastic insert that has silicone on the exterior of it. So as you push it down, it forces air out of the cavity. And then once you have it filled with cabbage, it pushes the cabbage down and acts as a weight and keeps the cabbage submerged under the brine, which is important to make sure so you don't develop mold or develop any nasty bacteria that's going to ruin your sauerkraut that you work so hard on. And then once you've got that, you just drop a lid. So I'm going to take my sliced cabbage, I'm going to transfer it into here, but first I'm going to put this on my scale and zero it out, because after I add my cabbage to this, I'm going to need to salt it, and it's a 1.5 to 2% weight of salt to shredded cabbage. This is getting a lot fuller than I thought it would already. Once you transfer your cabbage over into your crock, weigh it, and I've got 10 pounds in here, which is 160 ounces, and using that 1.5 to 2% weight for salt, that's going to be around 3 1/4 ounces. So I've got my scale set up here. And I've got my 3 1/4 ounces. And then I'm just going to sprinkle half of this over the top of the cabbage. And then start just working this in just a little bit. You don't need to go too crazy right now. You basically just want that salt to start working its way through all the cabbage and helping you in breaking this down into a brine. And then once you've got that mixed up, you're going to add the other half and work that in as well. So once you have this worked in, you're then going to let it sit about 10 to 15 minutes to let the salt help break down the cell walls and start releasing its juices. And then you're going to go back in with your hands and really start crushing it and try and get as much juice out of the cabbage as you absolutely can. So working the cabbage like this is something that would be great to have your kids help you out with. You get to reach your hands in there, play with your food, and it really introduces children to preparing their own food, to cooking, and hopefully makes it an enjoyable experience for them. After about 10 to 15 minutes, it's reduced in size by quite a bit, and at this point, you're basically going to want to start crushing it. So you'll take a handful and just squeeze it as hard as you can, and then take up another handful, and then keep doing that. And as you do this, you can tell that a lot of the moisture is starting to come out of the cabbage. And so this is going to be your brine. You're not going to need to add any water to it if you've done this properly and if you're using fresh cabbage. So just keep doing this, keep letting this liquid come out, and don't be afraid of ruining the texture by doing this. Your kraut's going to come out super crunchy, really good, and this is only going to make it better. And then it helps too if you just sort of crush it against the bottom with your fist. So go around doing that. And then pick it up again. And as you can see, there is a ton of brine coming out of this. So just keep doing that for about 5 minutes maybe until you have enough brine to cover the amount of cabbage that you've got in your crock or your mason jar or whatever you're using as your fermentation vessel. So after you get done kneading it really well, you're going to end up with something that looks like this, where there's a lot of brine and the cabbage is all squashed down nicely. At this point, I've still got obviously a lot of cabbage to go through, but if you were done now, you would take your lid, squish it down, let a little bit of liquid come out of the top so that it creates a nice airlock and there's going to be no air that's pulled back down into it. Take your lid, slap that on, put it in a semi-cool, dark place, and you're going to let this sit for about 10 to 14 days, depending on both the temperature of the area it's in and your own personal preference with how sour you like your kraut. So don't be afraid to get in here after even like 7-8 days. Try it, see what you think, and then keep trying it every day. And then if you make more than one batch, you can then start figuring out how long you like letting it sit for, and go from there. And so then if you're like me and super clumsy and just drop stuff everywhere, make sure you wash this before you put it in. It is important to keep your crock clean. Any dirt, any bacteria that gets in this could potentially ruin your fermentation. And you just want to make sure all of your equipment's clean before and then after you use it. So one thing to keep in mind is you're going to want to use a high quality salt for this. You cannot use iodized salt because the iodine in it actually prevents the microbial action that forms sauerkraut and makes it sour. So you can't use that. What we use is a high quality sea salt, small grain, and you really want something that also tastes good because once again your two ingredients are cabbage and salt. So if either of those two ingredients aren't that great, you're not going to end up with a great sauerkraut. Also, we've been working here at the Albion Food Hub, and we really want to thank them for letting us work here and take up their space, make a giant mess, which we're obviously going to be cleaning up here in a little bit. And also the whole crew at Green Gardens, they are the ones that we source our cabbage from. They're awesome people, they grow great vegetables, and we're just really happy to have them, both of them, Albion Food Hub and Green Gardens, as friends and is willing to help us out and let us do things using their spaces.
Absolutely.
All right, so I've got this pretty well full. You're going to want to leave at least a little bit of headroom on any vessel that you're using. As this ferments, it's going to bubble, it's going to produce CO2. The whole thing's going to rise up a little bit. And as you can see, there's plenty of suds on my hand. And so when it does that, you're going to need it to give it room or else it's going to bubble up out of the top and then you're going to end up with a mess. And I still recommend that you put something underneath whatever you're fermenting in just so you're not wrecking your counters or whatever you have stored on. So it just doesn't get super messy. So basically you're just going to force down your lid with your little inner ring on it. And as you force it down, you can see hopefully that there's liquid that's starting to come out of the top here. So you're going to continue pushing that down until there's a good amount of liquid on that top portion there. And then you're going to not have any oxygen that's going to be able to leak through. So as you can see, there's a really good amount of liquid here on top. And then you can scoop some of this that I just dumped out back on top to keep it covered. You're then going to take your lid. Nope, don't do that.
Oh, don't do that?
No, so
don't plug the hole.
Don't plug the hole. The hole you want to be open because you want this off gas. You want CO2 to come up and out of it, or else this entire lid is just going to lift up because there's nowhere for it to go. So
it's going to rocket into the ceiling.
Yeah, it's going to rocket into the ceiling like beer one time when I brewed.
Only once.
So then we toss the lid on, and this then just needs to find a home for a couple weeks, and you're then going to have sauerkraut. So I'm going to finish up these, and I'm going to have to fill up a couple jars because I expected this thing to hold a little bit more.
We said it was 50 pounds at the beginning. This is
35, 36 pounds.
Somewhere in there. Definitely less than 50.
Yeah. But
Google is not always correct.
That's all right. We've got extra jars, so hand me that mason jar there. So I guess if you were going to be using a mason jar, doing something a little bit small.
Yeah, I'll do this.
If you're just going to be using a mason jar, this is how you would do it. You take your jar.
And this has been washed.
And then you just start packing it full.
Getting all that brine in there. Using a canning funnel would probably help.
Yeah, it would, but we don't have one.
There's one over there.
That's right.
The food hub is well stocked with supplies. This is our first time using in the kitchen, so we're not familiar with where everything is.
So once you get all the cabbage in there, you then take your extra brine, pour it in here on top, and then keep grabbing the fermentation top. So then clean off your lid a little bit here. You're then going to take your weight and then just gently drop it in the top there. That's going to help keep that cabbage submerged. You then take your lid, screw that on.
Fairly snug, right?
Yeah, it needs to be fairly snug. Just finger tight. It doesn't need to be wild. Take your little pump. Yep, you just line it there and it snaps on there kind of nice. And then just give it 3 or 4 good pumps. And then that helps remove at least some of the oxygen. So then that CO2 has somewhere to go, and then you also aren't going to deal with an oxygen environment, which helps prevent mold, prevents any sort of nastiness from really growing in there and creates a nice environment. This one's also really nice because it has a little date wheel on top of it, so you set the date that you got it started so that you know, okay, add 14 days, add 10 days, and then you know to take it out.
I'll show the close up of this. This thing is really nice. And we're gonna have a link to this. So there is the little date guy there, and I probably just shifted everything in there, but that's okay. We'll fix it all up.
We ended up making 53 pounds of sauerkraut. You obviously do not need to make this much. You can do as simple as a pint jar just to try it out. I think you're going to be really impressed with how good homemade sauerkraut is, on top of how good it is for you. And then the awesome thing about it too is you can change it up, you can make it fit whatever flavor you want. You can put hot peppers, you can put garlic, you can put different herbs and spices. Really make it your own, try stuff, see what you like, see what you don't like. You can use different types of cabbages, you can use red cabbage. The only thing to keep in mind is the crisper and firmer the head of cabbage that you use, the crisper the final product is going to end up being. We'd like to once again thank Albion Food Hub for letting us use their space, and then Green Gardens for growing this amazing produce. So once again, I'm Rob from Frontier Farmhouse. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, or follow our blog. We're going to include links to those down in the description below. So if you give us a follow, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching.
Okay, just like pretend like you're cutting stuff and like doing stuff.